Welcome to Disruptive Successor, a show for next generation leaders in family businesses and entrepreneurs who want to disrupt the status quo and take their existing business to a whole new level. We all know that what got us here isn't going to get us there. This show will provide inspiration, advice, and resources to help you create massive impact. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Hi, this is Jonathan Goldhill, and welcome back to another episode of the Disruptive Successor Show. And today's guest is Rich Russakoff. Rich is an internationally acclaimed business coach, speaker, author, and serial entrepreneur. President and CEO of Coach to the Best, Rich is sought after by CEOs and entrepreneurs throughout the world. Rich writes a daily email called Food for Thought, which was the basis of his most recent book, People, Time, and Money, which is available on Amazon now and it's just been released. And he's coming out with a second version of this book in March. He's also the author of How to Make Banks Compete to Lend You Money. Rich, welcome to the show today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Jonathan.
So, Rich, I'm so glad to have you on as a guest. You and I are kindred spirits here. I think we have similar ethnic and family lineage. We have similar coaching, I think, philosophies, and draw from some of the same source materials, if you will. And our family businesses are quite interesting. My family, as you know, built a large clothing manufacturing business that was based in Philadelphia, North Philadelphia. And your family is from Philadelphia, and your family built a dry cleaning business. So we were both in we were not in the schmata business per se. But we were both in the clothing business to some degree. So today, I'm really hoping that you'll share some of the lessons that you have taken from your family business. And I know many of these lessons, I read your daily blog, and I know that some of these lessons are probably embedded in your blog. And that blog was the source material for your book and your forthcoming book. So I'm really excited to speak with you today, Rich.
Thank you. And it's the story is my family has been in the dry cleaning business for 76 years. And I think for an audience that's interested in family businesses, the good, the bad, the ugly, I have a lot to share that I think can be insights along those lines. So I'm looking forward to sharing what were the ups and the downs, and some things that others might learn that can help them deal with issues that they may experience similar to ours.
Sounds good. So why don't we approach this probably the way you and I approach an offsite planning engagement? And let's start with the wins, because we want to congratulate ourselves on the wins, and then we'll get, and then we'll talk about like what was broken in the family business. So what were the ups? What was the goods that your family business brought? I can certainly tell you that my family business brought a lot of goodness to our family, huge blessings, a lot of freedom. And it's why I do what I do, by the way. It's that I was given a certain amount of freedom at an early age, and it made me want to give back and help others to find their freedom through entrepreneurship. So what were some of the wins in your family's business?
Well, first of all, I grew up living behind the business and upstairs from the business the first 6 years. And my mother graduated from Temple University, majoring in accounting. And while she was there, she took a job as a bookkeeper for a dry cleaner. And when my father and my mom got married, he suggested that they opened up a drop store and they would do the cleaning. And my parents opened up their first store, anybody that knows Philadelphia, at Glenwood and Ridge Avenue. And the one store grew to 2, grew to 3, grew to 4. And then they were able to get financing to make a dry cleaning plant. So they were actually able to do the dry cleaning themselves. So they were in the business my whole life, and I worked for my parents from the time I could work at all, on weekends and on vacations, Saturdays, holidays. And at 16, when I had a driver's license, I was able to open up a dry cleaning route where I would pick up clothes Friday, bring them to the dry cleaning store. We clean them Saturday, and Saturday night, I would take them to a client base of about 10 or 20. So that was my first business. But my parents taught me how to run a business ethically, how to take care of people that you worked for, always put the customer first. And it really set the foundation for the businesses I've had. And as I said to you, Jonathan, I have 2 other brothers. I'm the one that got away from the business. I knew it wasn't what I wanted to do, but my other 2 brothers were in the business, and my parents ran the business very well. My father handling the operation side of it, my mother handling the financial side, and the 2 of them collectively making the decisions to grow each step of the way.
So let's understand and unpack this a little bit. So there are 3 children in the family?
There's 4. There's a sister of mine who also did not go in the business.
Okay. And so do you think that the children had a different perspective on growing up in the business? You sound like you were very enthusiastic, that you were put to work at a young age and you seem to like it. But I can imagine other children maybe not liking it. What was where was your sister at in this whole thing? What was their sense? Mm-hmm.
My sister was the baby.
Okay.
She's 12 years younger than I am, and we're still very close. My 2 brothers, one of them passed away at 53, and the other is just hit 70 years old. I'm 75. Maybe he's 69. I'm not sure. There's about a 6-year difference. But I worked in the business every weekend until I got a job with a radio station in Philadelphia. My brothers who went into the business actually didn't work in the business like I did growing up. And I thought that was invaluable for me in just learning values, getting a work ethic. And
at such a young age, Rich, you missed playing basketball and baseball, maybe with your friends on the weekends. I mean, yeah, no.
The weekends were for my parents. I ran track in high school, and also I was on the cross country team, but that wasn't weekends.
Okay. So, all right. So let's talk about the evolution of the family business. Let's get into some of the downsides, because I know you shared with me on a phone call before this some of the problems that your brothers ran into and that your mother ran into. It wasn't just all roses and nice smelling shirts coming out of this whole experience.
Well, you just reminded me of something that really showed me what survivors my parents were. Just focusing on them. In the 1960s, there were riots throughout the country, starting, I think, in Detroit. And a riot hit Philadelphia, and every store we owned had the windows broken and all the dry cleaning taken out of it.
Oh,
so
wow.
You paid for all this clothing. You have to do reports for people whose clothing was stolen. And our store girls in many of the stores were out front saying, hey, these are wonderful people. These are your clothes you're taking. But there was a frenzy. We were caught up in it. But somehow they overcame that. They survived and they prospered again. And it takes a certain sense of tenacity and dedication and commitment to do that. And I saw them do that. And that was awe-inspiring for me.
That is pretty amazing. I also was in my early career as a consultant, was promoting a program by the state of California to help dry cleaners get rid of the perchlorethylene that is so prevalent in dry cleaning plants, which are dangerous chemicals to be around. And your mom, you told me, lived upstairs from one of the plants. I mean,
well, she didn't live upstairs. Her office was upstairs.
But she must have been impacted by that. Yes.
Because she got Parkinson's disease just near the end of her life.
Wow.
And there was no question there was a cause and effect. And today, when I'm working with clients and they're looking to buy property, and it used to be a dry cleaner, they have to tear up all the ground underneath because of the consequences of the chemicals. But nobody knew then.
Yeah, I know. I mean, these are the hazards sometimes of being in businesses, whether you're maybe dealing with gas stations and oil or, toxic chemicals. We were also involved in helping remove underground storage tanks or providing financing for basically both of these. These are tough businesses, but let's get on to the family side of the business and talk about some of the lessons that you learned. And these maybe, I think, Rich, it seems to me sometimes we learn more of our lessons out of our failures than out of our wins, because we have to really think through like what happened here. So you had these two brothers that went into the business, and you were not in the business. What was the experience of you maybe being outside of the business, first of all, and having two brothers that were in the business?
Well, I left Philadelphia in 1969 and never came back.
Wow.
Other than for visits. So I wasn't really there. My brother, Harvey, married young, and they had a baby, and he wanted to be a psychologist. And he'd gone to school for it. And he was making very little money. And his wife was used to better things. And somehow Harvey ended up in the dry cleaning business. And my father and my brother went into award cleaners in downtown Philadelphia. And I'll share quickly my father's genius for marketing. When they opened up their plant in downtown Philadelphia, and it was our first prestigious store called Award Cleaners, he said, we're going to roll back prices 15 years to what dry cleaning was. So you could get a pair of pants cleaned for 33 cents, for example.
Wow.
Or a suit for 79 cents.
Wow.
And what it did was it flooded them with business. Now, once a dry cleaner has your business, when you come back to pick up clothes, you're going to bring clothes with you. So the joke in the industry is you keep a client indefinitely until you do something they don't like, and then they go to the next closest dry cleaner.
Right.
And that's the nature of the industry.
Sure.
But so right off the ground, they got off to a terrific start. And when my father was alive, he and my brother ran the business very well. And after my father passed away, my brother became partners with my mother. And they didn't necessarily see eye to eye. He was doing drugs. He wasn't showing up. He would only come in from time to time open up the safe and take money out, and then she had to pay all the bills.
Oh boy.
So he was totally irresponsible. And she was stuck with making sure all the obligations were met, which meant at some point she had to rob Peter to pay Paul. Now, my brother Stuart loved being in the dry cleaning business. I don't think my brother Harvey ever really loved it, but he had a very good living from it.
Right.
So he settled. But my brother Stuart loved it. The thing is, my mom, who is an accountant and certainly knows every aspect of financing from the dry cleaning side and all the margins, never really educated Stuart. And out of his operation, which was called Carvel, and that was in King of Prussia, he just spent whatever he wanted. And in the summer, your business drops considerably, and she would subsidize it, and he didn't have a clue. So he wasn't trained in the basics of the financial side of the business, and he was a heavy drinker. He did drugs. He overdid everything. He was a wonderful human being, but totally irresponsible.
Right.
So the messages I have, if you're parents and your children go into your business and they're actually costing you money and not being responsible, you need to find a way to set boundaries.
Yeah.
Which is hard for a parent.
Really hard for a parent. And I don't know how bad your brother's drug problem was, but if he was an addict, addicts are liars, and they don't always tell the truth, and so it becomes very difficult to manage someone, and you can't manage that as a disease. So
I don't think he wasn't to the point that he couldn't. He couldn't function, and he wasn't on heroin or anything like that.
Right.
He snorted cocaine. He did grass, and he did everything to play.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, you certainly can take a business down pretty fast that way. And now your other brother, so he did well in the business, but he passed away young, and.
No, it was my dad that passed away. Let's get it straight. The one we were just talking about is the one that died at 53.
Right.
He had already lost the business.
Gotcha.
My mother died, and he had no financial backup, and he ultimately went into bankruptcy and lost it. And it was only after he lost it that he realized what he had. And his whole work ethic changed, but he already had the prize and lost it. And it impacted on my mother because she was subsidizing it.
Right. So let's just talk about the psychological dynamics in your family that were going on. I take it you were the oldest.
Yes.
And so being the oldest, you were first in the business, but you were also first out. And you
first in, first out.
Yeah. Right. Yep. And you were out doing your life, and now you're seeing and watching all this from afar. And you're coming home for probably Thanksgiving dinners, and you're participating in conversations around the table, maybe, and understanding what's going on with your brothers. And I think this is a very interesting dynamic. For oldest children to first of all leave and go off and do something more independent. That was an interesting dynamic. Do you think that your younger brothers were feeling a sense of responsibility that they had to join the family?
Two cases. My brother Stuart never thought of doing anything else.
Okay.
He's the one that died very young.
Yes.
My brother Harvey really had much higher aspirations.
Right.
And he went into the business because he had a young child, and this way he would be financially doing very well.
Mm-hmm.
So they went into it for different reasons. They had different perspectives. Harvey was more grounded than Stewart. And there were just some changes that occurred in him where after my dad died, he did not see eye to eye with my mom, and she paid the price.
Tough. And what do you think your parents wanted? Did they have a desire to have their kids come into the business? Did they give you all sort of a blank slate and plate or whatever you want to call it and say, hey, you guys do what you want, but there's an opportunity here? What was their message at the time?
Well, my parents had no problem with my wanting to do other things.
Mm-hmm.
They encouraged Harvey to go into the field of psychology, which is what he really wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And for Stewart, he didn't finish college, and this was a good place for him and for them to feel comfortable that he was making a good living.
Okay. And so interesting dynamics. What were some of the takeaway lessons that you might share with others in family businesses based on maybe some of the either wins or losses? What failed?
Well, I have tremendous compassion for my mom,
mm-hmm.
who should have, in her later years, been able to live life without any worries.
Mm-hmm.
And she was someone that certainly knew how to manage finances. But the irresponsibility of her two sons made her last few years after my father died very difficult. So that hurts. That hurts because she's a fantastic person.
Mm-hmm.
And for my brother Harvey, and this is what I would say to anyone who wants to take the easy road to go into a family business, if it's not where your heart is, and if you don't really feel that you're bringing out the best in yourself, I would say do something else.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a tough thing. I wrote a book for next generation leaders that I think are disruptors, and I spend a fair amount of time in the front part of the book talking about asking questions is, are you coachable? I'm sure you think about the same things when you take on clients. Are you someone who can learn? Are you someone who's trusting? Are you humble? Are you hungry? Are you people smart? Are you curious? I mean, I think that too many people probably go into the family business because it's like a birthright or it's an expectation, and they don't necessarily embrace what you and I would call coachable characteristics. And as a result, they exhibit maybe entitlement, or they exhibit contemptuousness for their siblings or for their parents and the way they're doing things. I mean, that it's not always a healthy dynamic, and it's so important to build that healthy dynamic in there.
Yeah, you nailed it, Jonathan. And when it's not a healthy dynamic, it's lose-lose across the board.
Yeah, it really is. So, all right, so let's switch gears here. You've just come out with this book. It's a lot of fun to read. It's the kind of book that you can literally read a chapter. Well, I won't say, well, I just about to say, while you're sitting on the John, if you're because it's a few pages, they're poignant. They've got clever titles. They're very personable also, meaning that they oftentimes start with a personal story that you've learned, and they seem to have come out of your years of experience just in life. And so I really enjoyed reading it. Let's talk about maybe some of some of the contents of the book that you really like, some of the chapters. Some of my favorites, because they were useful to me, was the phases of growth, for people to understand that there are different phases in a business. Like you talk about mission and sales driven, 1 to 10 person company. And then you go into phase 2 where you're operations driven, 10 to 25 people. And then phase 3, where you're 25 to 50 people and you're transforming and recreating the company. And that's a place that I think you and I like to insert ourselves and help our clients.
That's where we're definitely needed. I'm dealing with 2 clients this week that are suffering through the purgatory of phase 3. And what happens is, by the time you get to 25 to 50 people, you don't know all your customers. You may not know all the people that work for you. Communication systems break down. Systems and processes break down. What used to work no longer works, and it's not scalable. You have to throw it out and reinvent systems and processes. And what's heartbreaking is people that worked so hard for you in phase 1 and phase 2, as the business gets more complex and more sophisticated, may not have the skills, and you have to let them go.
Yep. Very tough thing, right?
Or they're making 35, 40,000, and now you're bringing in C-level people for the first time who are making 6 figures, and there's resentment. So it's a very difficult stage, and most companies don't get through it.
Yeah.
Very few companies are larger than 5 million in sales.
Yep. As we know, like very few. So let's pick out maybe a couple of chapters. I think this might be really the toughest question I'm going to ask today, which is, what are some of the favorite chapters that you have, or that maybe are germane to family business, or just, or just some of your, maybe a favorite one, or one you've just maybe coached someone on recently? Anything come to mind?
Well, there's nothing I enjoy more than when I write a post and then I'm talking to my clients over the course of the week, and they'll say, "Was that me you were talking about?"
That's funny.
What I find, ironically, is the hardest things for entrepreneurs is managing the people side of the business and dealing with people issues, not the strategy or even the financial side.
Yes.
But that can be very painful, particularly in phase 3, where there can be morale issues.
Yep.
So I'm working on a post for Monday where I'm talking about that after talking with 2 clients this week that were very upset about how they were treated when they think they're really being good, solid, caring entrepreneurs and leaders. And the focus of that one's going to be, you have to have a tough hide to do this. And as you say, I like to tell stories. So when I had my first business, which was a jewelry and gift business on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, 2 buddies of mine who graduated from Columbia University were there working for me. And I paid them salaries, not by the hour. And they said to me, "You're underpaying us." And they're my friends. And the last thing I would want to do is underpay somebody.
Sure.
So I said, "Okay, we'll pay you by the hour." And we agree on a generous rate. And it turns out they're only working 32 hours a week. Now, why should that bother me?
Right.
40 years later? But it does, because it hurts.
Yeah. Under, Understandable.
And so the idea of knowing that you don't have to take it personally, or you can't take it personally, and people have their own agendas.
Yeah, I think that's a good learning lesson. And so I just want to back up and just unpack some of what you just said. So I usually tell my clients that the first year of working together, we're mostly going to focus first on your people. Make sure you have the right people in the right seats, and then we're going to focus on your execution and make sure people are getting things done and the right things done. And you and I both come out of the scaling up community, where there's a more robust approach that involves strategy and cash management, because these are hyper growth companies. But most of my clients are not hyper growth companies. They're not going to be $100 million to $1 billion companies. I suspect yours are as well.
And there are darn few that will be.
Exactly. And that's why this entrepreneurial operating system has become so popular. The book Traction has spoken to so many people. Not a week goes by that someone doesn't say, "Oh, is this like Traction, what you do, or EOS?" I mean, and maybe you hear that same thing, is because it's very strong on the people and the execution components of the business. And yeah, I think it's, you learned a lesson early on, and it's sorry to hear so many years later that it still zings.
It's just life.
Yeah, it is life. But, I do think that too often the clients that underpay their employees tend to get poorer performers. And we know that the research seems to support, hire an A player, and an A player will get so much more done than a B and C player combined.
It goes back to Jim Collins,
Mm-hmm.
great, and you'll get 3 times the performance out of a great player than you will out of a good player.
Yeah, and so people really need to heed the wisdom that, really dig deep into your pockets and pay them more. So as you were telling your story, I was wondering, were your friends, like, were they getting more done at that hourly rate, or at that higher hourly rate, or were they just doing the same? So
they were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
They were doing good work. For me, the hard part was when they were accusing me of cheating them.
Yeah.
And I have 2 clients this week that have gone through something similar.
Mm.
There's something you said about first focusing on the people.
Mm-hmm.
When I started my coaching business about 35 years ago, if I was working with a client and they had an issue with one employee, and each of our calls was focused on that, I finally said, if we go 90 days and we're still focusing on your issues with that one person, I refuse to talk to you about that anymore, because you're not taking action.
Yes, good point.
And maybe there's some kind of relationship where you're getting something out of this too, but I want to be your strategic coach. Yeah. What are you paying me for to deal with the blame game?
Oh, Rich, it sounds just all too familiar. My early days of coaching, which go back many years ago as well, not as many years, but many years, I found that people would talk about this one, key person, and maybe they only had a few people. And it reminds me of a client who said, "I can't possibly go to your all-day seminar. I mean, I couldn't leave my business for a full day." And at the end of that workshop, he said, "I don't know what I was thinking, like, tell anyone who can't go to your all-day workshop for a day." But like, they hung on to that key employee for just way too long. And then, once you get rid of that person that you thought you couldn't live without, and then realize how much better your life is, suddenly the wings, like your wings start to come on in your business and you fly. And yeah, I can't imagine wanting to talk about that same employee 90 days. I could totally relate to it.
And the other thing is that the employees that work for you generally say, "What took you so long?"
Yeah, exactly. So true. So true.
The one question I like to ask is, if you had to hire them over again, would you?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, then I say, why are they still here?
Yeah.
And that seems to be an awakening.
Totally. Let's look and see. I don't know that I have the answer here, but I'm looking to see in your book, or just from your wisdom, any tools for dealing with difficult family members that are involved in the business, or siblings, that where you have to have a difficult conversation. Because I do have one tool. I call it the critical conversation framework. But I'd love to hear what you've got that you think, when dealing with a difficult family member.
I wouldn't be surprised if we're looking at the same thing. Is this based on Crucial Conversation?
It is. Yep, exactly.
Well, it's a wonderful book for every entrepreneur to read,
yep.
And for every human being to read.
Yeah.
One of the things that I try to emphasize with managers or leaders is, and this is in the book, manage the behavior, criticize the behavior, not the person. Point out why the behavior is out of context with the values, how it hurts the business, and that you need to change that behavior.
Yeah.
And be the coach, not the cop, to help them through that. And then if the pattern continues, write them up and say it's unacceptable. And if it happens again, we're going to have to let you go.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll be called in when and this isn't necessarily a family member. This is anyone that suddenly went from being really good to having an attitude, or always had an attitude. And I take them aside and I say, you can leave here, you can go somewhere else, but you're going to take yourself with you.
Yeah.
So you can make the change here, where you know how well you can be treated, or you can go somewhere else. But if you don't make the changes within yourself, you're always going to have this battle. And I find years ago, I had a job with a company where we were hiring over 100 people for a project in Los Angeles we were doing public opinion interviews. And my job was to call resumes. And what I discovered was that we are remarkably consistent. And whatever we do in one place, we're going to do in the next. And if they say the person was great for the first 42 days, and then day 43, they started coming in late, and day 56, they started missing days, that pattern repeats itself again and again.
Yep. I see that all too often. I think one of the difficulties in this whole concept of the crucial conversation is when they're, let's say, two siblings that are in a business and they don't see eye to eye. I mean, certainly you saw it in your mom and dad. Of course, they were married. One was the finance person, one's the marketing person. But we see sometimes the personality types of those two types, they can be at like oil and water with each other. And siblings who grow up in a business, they're maybe next gen, maybe they inherit it. One person seems maybe lazier. One person seems hardworking. One person really should be the CEO, but maybe the father didn't or mother didn't appoint that person the CEO. These become more difficult, challenging conversations.
Yes. And then the question is, should both stay?
Yes.
Or should somebody leave? And is there a framework for it?
Yeah.
Because in a family business, it's not always easy to have that framework. And then you might have mom or pop say, "Oh, you can't let so-and-so go. You got to keep him. What will he do? How will he feed his family?" And I'm talking a stereotype when I say that, but it's a very difficult challenge. What have you found worked, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a difficult. Well, I don't have a good framework for it, Rich. I think one of the challenges that founders, predecessors, parents, whatever, find themselves is that you can't parent all your children equally or the same because each one of them has different needs, right? Case in point, you have the need to go off and do your own thing, and Harvey and Stuart, or one of them had the needs to go into the business, maybe both. And, I think there isn't a simple framework, at least maybe estate planners have it, where they help parents to say, okay, well, look, this one will get the business, this one will get your real estate, and this one, but there isn't always enough of those different things to go around. Maybe there's only just the business, and that's the only asset. And this is all the parent can really offer. And so now what do they offer the other child that is being asked to leave the business? And they're not going to leave the business because they feel like they're walking away from their birthright. So I don't know. My tool is my hammer for every one of these situations, right? It's my only tool in my tool belt is that crucial conversation framework, or getting people to use. I use imago therapy sometimes with my clients, where get them to understand each other's viewpoint, and it's something it's used in marital counseling, and you get that other party to parrot back what the viewpoint of the person who's delivering it, so that it's basically what some might call getting on the same page with each other and getting an understanding. It's not easy.
What I recommend, and it doesn't mean it's going to work, is what's your role and responsibility and what's mine. And I own my roles and responsibility. You own yours. And we each have an obligation to hold each other accountable for them. And then there are some decisions we're going to have to make together.
Yeah.
That has to do with money, that has to do with expansion. Maybe it has to do with marketing dollars or a new software or something like that. But if you can stay in your own lane and each person does their role responsibly, you can make that work.
Yeah, I think that works well when they stay in the business together. And I think it works even better when parents can create the connection between their children so that they play well together. And I think that's the parents' job to make their kids play well together. But it isn't always the case. So I think
and I'm not necessarily talking male or female, but then you get another spouse involved.
Yep.
And the spouse says, "Hey, you're not being treated right. You should be making more money."
Yep.
And that creates a tension. And sometimes that's inevitable.
I think these are the tough things and tough challenges that families have, and that this is probably explains some of why businesses don't make it into the third and fourth generation. But a small percentage is just working through all these things and building a healthy dynamic. Not always easy.
On my first speaking tour of Asia, I talked to CEOs in Singapore and in Malaysia, and they're sharing with me that they've embraced, in those days, it wasn't scaling up, it was Rockefeller habits. And they embraced Rockefeller habits. They love doing it. Everybody goes to the huddles, the meetings, except my brother or my sister, who was having none of it. And my parents insist I keep them in the business.
Right.
So my answer to them was pay them to stay home.
Wow. Well, that ought to be a chapter in your book if you haven't written that blog already.
I haven't written that one yet.
That's one I'm going to take home with me. We need to wrap up here, but I really like that. Pay them to stay home. Look, I think if they're getting enough of a distribution check or dividend and the business is profitable, then let them keep that. But they don't deserve a salary for staying at home. But I think it's if you don't have the distribution check large enough. I just was with a family business. They have 16 family members, like family office, 3,000 units in New York City and around the country. And for 19 years, my friend worked in the business and never got a paycheck. So, there's some strange things that happen in family businesses, I have to say.
Yes, there are. So if we're not out of town, I have one more story.
Yes,
but
please.
If you are, I understand.
No, we've got time. We've got just take us home.
Okay. This is something I find is more valuable than virtually everything I teach. You're familiar with Andy Grove, who is a Silicon Valley legend with Intel. Somewhere in the 80s, Intel, who had made their fortune and reputation selling microchips, which used to be on IBM computers, Intel inside. The Japanese came into the market. The Japanese were making them faster, cheaper, and better. And the handwriting was on the wall that Intel was in big, big trouble. And Andy Grove he was president at that time, and he went to his CEO, who was Gordon Moore, who is very famous for saying the prices of computers will go down,
right,
and the power will go up.
Moore's Law, as I recall.
That's exactly right. He said, Gordon, if the board of directors were to fire us tomorrow and a new CEO came in, what would that new CEO do? And Gordon said, they'd get out of microchips and get into microprocessors. And Andy said, let's you and I go for a walk and come back in as the new CEO and president and make that change. So I always love to ask my clients, at least every 6 months, if you were fired and a new CEO came in, what would they do? And it allows you to escape the emotional and get pragmatic. So it's a wonderful lesson that I hope I can share with your audience.
I love that. So, folks, that's from the chapter, Ask Yourself the Andy Grove Question. And like I said, it's only 2 pages. So you could read it really fast. You could read one a night before you go to sleep and dream on it. So, Rich, this has been a lot of fun. I love your stories. I love your inspiration. You're still going strong at 75, doing what you love to do. I expect to be following in your footsteps.
I'll hold you accountable, Jonathan.
Oh, boy, I know. So, Rich, at coachtothebest.com, you are coach to the best growing companies. That's how they can reach you, is Rich at coachtothebest.com?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thanks for spending time with us today.
Thank you so much.
All right. So, folks, if you like this, listen, subscribe, share it with your friends, and tell others. And if you're interested in Rich's book, go check it out. It's called People, Time, and Money, and it's on Amazon. today. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Thank you for joining us on the Disruptive Successor Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, review, and share with a friend who would benefit from the message. If you're interested in picking up a copy of my book, Disruptive Successor, go to disruptivesuccessor.com.